Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of Successfully Unsuccessful podcast. I'm your host, Josh Dietrich, and today in the house physically we have a good friend of mine, mentor, colleague, Mr. Ric Olson. How are you, Ric?
Hi, Josh. It's great to be with you. Wonderful. What a blessing.
It is mine to have, and the blessing for you to be here today is incredible. After an hour and a half conversation, and maybe a month ago or so, another hour and a half, 2-hour conversation, and just the continuation to lean into maybe where the Lord has a relationship developing in our own life was really great to just process that out loud with you. But was excited to have you on the show and your willingness, because there was a season of my life where God had you and I meeting monthly in a group, in a cohort of other men, maybe 12 or so businessmen. And Ric, you were the most senior and wise of them all, and I was closest to the youngest on the list, second to the youngest. And how impactful was that for me to be able to just be around other guys that have gone through the trenches, live life in a way that honors the Lord, aspirational for me, but really on the flip side of that, to be there when I processed one of my hardest, most difficult challenges in the infidelity and part of my successfully unsuccessful story. And you were instrumental. You were there. You were part of that room. And I just recall the peace and the quiet, tender-hearted version of you walk through your marriage in the parallel paths that gave me clarity to not feel guilt and shame about the sin I had dealt with or the things that I had struggled with. And you encouraged me in such a way that I couldn't believe that there was another believer on earth that was just hearing me, relating to me, and encouraging me, that allowed me to go home and eventually tell my wife what I had done. And so it was power, it was motivation, it was the Holy Spirit working through you. So I can't share enough. First of all, that's my thank you to you for being in my life for, I don't know, what do we go back, 2018 now, as we just said? And so I just got to say that. So thank you, and your work isn't done. 75 years young, right?
That's right.
Adjunct professor at Bethel. Is that technically the term?
That's right.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah.
Still able to pour into the lives and hearts of others. But before that, third or fourth career, I guess now, you've done some massive things in the business world and leading enterprises in healthcare, long-term healthcare systems, and managing their business, also for the IRS, and doing some other unique things in ministry. And so, plethora of knowledge. So grateful to have you. My introduction, I guess, can't stop. Ric Olson, say hello. Tell us where you're from. Tell me why you think you're here today. I would love to hear maybe some wisdom and what you feel led to share right now.
Well, Josh, I had the privilege of being part of that trusted advisor group, and it was a two-way street. I want to be clear about that. I learned as much from everybody else around the table, probably more than what I could have shared with others. And I am so grateful to see what God is doing in your life, to see what's happened, to see what's going to happen, to hear your passions. To me, that has always been part of my life, is to be able to pour into others. But also, as a result of that, I get the benefit of learning myself dramatically, and that's what's happened. So what brought me here today was a tremendous amount of common ground between the two of us.
Yeah.
Within that forum overall, I just want to make one comment. My wife passed away from cancer a year ago, August, but it's been interesting to me. There's been no particular plan to communicate with Ric Olson from that forum, and while I was taking care of my wife for 3 years, I wasn't involved and haven't been able to get back to the forum. But you guys keep showing up in different ways.
Right.
You know, it's like you're watching out for me in your own way, whether it's a lunch or a business idea or some event you've got going with your business or whatever that you invite me to. I have just been so privileged and honored. So that's why I'm here.
Well, you touched on a few really key things, and I think sometimes it's easy to just stuff faith or religion in a box. And we can save that for Sunday. We can save that for our men's group. We can save that for our, our small group or whatever it is, right? And then we can put our business hat on and go to work Monday through Friday and just put our head down and work, right? And then we can put that aside and we can go have a beer with our friends and, and put all those other things of who we are aside and put on that hat, and what you just shared with me is a reminder that you're a human, I'm a human, and God made us both very uniquely different, but also the same, to bear his image and to create and to do what we've been called to do and made to do. And so we can have common ground, and that word is fantastic. Like common ground, we are on the same playing field. We have access to the same resources. But what makes the body so incredible is that the gifts and talents combined can do far more than we could imagine on our own, period, end of story. And so in 12 guys in a room, when you say you learn maybe more than you were able to share, I don't think anyone else could say differently. Like I think everyone would be aligned with that because you have so many life experiences, right? We all do. But when you combine what's going on in your marriage and the struggles maybe that it takes to be a successful husband, father, business person, that in many other ways gets drowned out. And the things that are important get amplified in life. But in that room, it slows down and you can do this and really hear a dude and really just realize, I'm glad you're here, right? And just take it for the opportunity is to learn and grow in the faith and that common belief. So I agree. You're here and you're here to share and pour in, and I wanted to kind of tap into that wisdom today. Your background by trade professionally before the broadcast, sort of that era or the interest in that, but how did you stumble into the finance, strategy, tax area, and how many years were you in it? And maybe you talk about the magnitude, scale at which you organized management at that level.
Well, I made it real clear to the Lord my senior year of college at Bethel that I hated accounting and wanted nothing to do with taxes or anything like that. So, but I got a business degree and a degree in political science and got a little economics thrown in that, but no accounting. And it was fine with me. But careful what you tell the Lord.
Right.
And about 3 years out, after working a myriad of jobs and getting married to my wife, I still can't figure out what she saw in me because I was digging ditches as a contractor and laborer and doing all kinds of odds and ends, doing a lot of retail, whatever, just to go wherever I could get work. But all the doors opened for a job with the Internal Revenue Service, Chicago district, and I was there for 52 months. And
that was your first kind of career in that?
Yeah, I was in retail before that.
Yeah.
But, I could have had a career in retail.
Sure.
But God led otherwise. But yeah, 52 months in the Chicago district. And, I was working for the IRS. I kept running into people who had the CPA designation. And I was working on a master's in communications from Wheaton College. But once I finished that, I talked to my wife and I said, I think I need to get a CPA. So I started at ground zero, College of Lake County, Roosevelt University, just taking accounting courses, the thing I hated. Today I'm teaching managerial accounting at Bethel, by the way. So you talk about managerial finance, but you talk about twists and turns,
Right.
But the long and short is I decided to go back and get the CPA and took the Becker CPA review course and a whole bunch of accounting courses and became a CPA. And one of the best things I ever did, because I eventually, through a very unique series of events, I'd asked the Lord for, IRS was not exactly where I pictured my career being.
Yeah.
And I had this vision of wanting to help a variety of businesses within a Christian dynamic. My grandfathers were Christian businessmen, one of them founder of CBMC.
We're going to unpack that too.
A long time ago. But, the long and short was CBMC Twin Cities. But the long and short was that my dad was a pastor, and so I had this passion for ministry, but God wasn't calling me to be a pastor. I was close to it as you could get without going. And yet the business side, I'm at the IRS going, Lord, this just doesn't feel like, I want to learn about a variety of businesses. But then out of nowhere, literally out of nowhere, through an organization called Inter Cristo, which was one of my adjunct professors at Wheaton, had made me familiar with that.
Okay.
Came a call from the controller of Swedish Covenant Hospital, which eventually resulted in an offer to be their budget manager. So what does a budget manager do?
Manages the budget.
You learn all the processes and the systems of the hospital. You learn the business very well. And then on my first day of work, I always caution my students. I say, watch what's in other duties is defined. Because he walked into my new office and said, well, we have one other part of the job I didn't tell you about. We have this network of retirement communities around the country for the Covenant, and we do the accounting for some of them right here. But once a year, we have to pull it all together. And so once in a while, the president of the Board of Benevolence is going to walk into your office and want some information, but you're in charge of that as of today, as well as the budget manager work for Swedish Covenant Hospital. So in one day, I was charged with learning everything about hospitals and learning everything about senior living that I could possibly learn in one day. So God answers prayer, doesn't he?
Oh, wow. That's unreal. Well, and one of my favorite sayings that you've shared is, I've heard probably a dozen times or more, never tell the Lord what you're not going to do. Yeah. Because I think you've shared a few instances where that's exactly where he's actually brought you. And I feel like that's a lesson so many times that I've looked back and I look at what I hope to accomplish, and then I'm reminded that how's that going to happen, and I can't ever and I won't ever. And I look back and I look at all the things I have done and how I've gotten here, and I look at his provision and I go, oh, it makes a lot of sense. Good thing his vision is bigger than mine, right? Yeah. But how has that played out in your life? Things that you told the Lord you weren't going to do. Becoming a CPA sounds like one of them. There was another instance, I think you were called to a role, and maybe it was the CPA one, but I thought there was another one specifically.
Well, there was one. I'll share a recent one because God is continuing to work.
Yeah,
He didn't stop with that.
Yeah, amen. Yeah,
I was for about the last 13 years or so, I've had my own consulting business called Lessons Learned Solutions. Mm-hmm. And the primary target audience was healthcare, long-term care facilities. I branched out for a while and did some non-for-profits and did some coaching through a group called Ministry Ventures in the Chicago area, and got familiar with every kind of not-for-profit you could ever imagine. When we moved to Minnesota, I also did that here. I did some not-for-profits, but I really wanted to do long-term care, particularly the smaller sized. I didn't care to be with the big systems. They have plenty of resource. And so I made it real clear with the Lord that my passion was long-term care or health care. Mm-hmm. My passion was I wasn't going to work with a particular software package, accounting package, and I wasn't going to work with a particular bank. I made it very clear. And then I got a call from Rob Welch, who's president of For His Glory Ministries and a dear brother in Christ, and knowing each other for years through going through the same family camp in Muskegon, Michigan. And each year Rob would share with me the business plan for His Glory, and I'd give a little input and get an idea what was going on. But this time he called me and said, Rick, we need a guy to direct the financial operations for His Glory. You can stay in Minnesota. We're in Missouri. You can do it from Minnesota. But we need somebody to look at this and also probably do some work on the analytics and the data from Africa where they minister. And all of a sudden I asked, well, what's your accounting package? It's the one I don't want to work with. What's your bank? The one I would never want to do business with is their bank. And of course he's a not-for-profit. So be careful what you tell the Lord you're not going to do. It's futile. Just get up in the morning and say, Lord, here am I, sort of a Samuel, here am I, send me, kind of thing. And, just don't put parameters around God. It's foolish.
But on the other end of that, right, we shared about a little bit in our conversation today about the orchestration that he continues to have his hand in, that you can't make this stuff up, and some of just the timeliness, the conversations that are intertwined, that directly kind kind of require only you in certain circumstances at that moment to really, without trying, right, be teed up for us that would be able to serve, provide financially, and kind of check all the boxes of what anyone would want. And on the flip side, right, of what we say we're not going to do, going through those challenges, God has a big reward on the other end. But then there are other things, right, that just hand over the keys and, takes the burden off of your shoulders, and, and then he 10X's it. Why don't you share about a couple of the blessings over the years in your experience of what God will do when you don't want it, but also what he'll do for you when you're not asking?
Well, he knows who we are, and he knows what our giftedness is.
Yeah.
And so in the early days, when there was a central office formed for what was called Covenant Retirement Communities, and it brought out a separate focus on the retirement communities from the hospital, from Swedish Covenant Hospital. I was the first employee of that new entity.
Nice.
We had nothing. When I mean nothing, we had a $500 check from a consultant to open the bank account. He was our interim CFO. Yeah. And, the long and short was, during the early days of that, I was reporting to him, and he had a mindset that just said, stay at your desk and do whatever you need to do and crank the numbers. Well, that's not me. I can crank numbers, but it was just awful. So I started pushing. I said, Lord, and I started exploring other jobs, and every door closed. It was just one right after the other. And I said, Lord, what are you doing? This isn't me. You wanted me to learn all these processes and systems. I can't learn it sitting at a desk running numbers. And But I learned a ton from this interim party. He was terrific. But he just had a different mindset. Mm-hmm. But then the day his replacement came on, and the new CFO, the first CFO of Covenant Retirement Communities, who I dreaded meeting because I was just cranking numbers, and frankly, the numbers weren't very good. And so I figured he'd have a lot of questions I couldn't answer. Sat down, and the first question he had for me was, how many residents do we serve? I didn't know. Nobody knew. We had no idea. Actually, he had asked one question prior to that. He said, what's the mission statement? We didn't have a mission statement. I had no idea what a mission statement was for us. So this particular gentleman became one of my primary mentors. And the next thing he said to me was, you're free to roam around the country. So I have over 1 million miles on United Airlines.
Oh, wow.
Roaming around the country. And he wanted me to meet with the regulators, not just our own communities, but to go in and see the people who are making the rules, the proposals, develop relationships with them. I got involved with numerous industry initiatives. You name it, I probably did some work on it.
Wow.
And all things way beyond anything I could have imagined or thought when I was sitting there just cranking numbers. Mm-hmm. But it all began with one phrase, you're free to roam around the country.
Unreal.
And did I ever roam?
Well, so recently you shared with me that, over the years and being married and having a couple kids, you shared a sentiment of a season in life where you were really focused in the outpouring of others in your life,
yeah.
in your organizations and nonprofits you were a part of. Really doing the mission is what you saw that God had for you, right? And, one thing that relates to some of my story now, and I'm reminded that even when we are doing what God has for us, we are sinful and we can get off track in some way and not hear our wife or not hear our child or not hear the Lord, right? And we can confuse our flesh and we can confuse the goals that we might think He set up for us. As you're sharing about roaming, and I don't remember the season or the timing, but there was a pocket of life, right, where you had your first child and then maybe some years later you had your second. But in between that, your marriage came to a place where you didn't expect, right? Did that have anything to do with the roaming in that season, or was this a different season?
Well, it actually had to do with some of the things I inherited. And I had a grandfather here who was Mr. Evangelical.
Right.
Wonderful, but most organizations in the Twin Cities has his name on it in one way or another. And I sort of saw that model. I saw my dad heading off to church meetings every evening as a pastor,
doing the Lord's work, right?
Doing the Lord's work. And there was some time reserved for me, but ministry. And I remember taking a group to Expo 72 when I was my first youth director job, and I was working youth director, going to Wheaton, already wearing multiple hats. And my other grandfather called me when we got home from Expo, and he basically said, "Grandson, slow it down." Well, he died the next day.
Oh, wow.
But he was the one that inspired something called Alive and Living. But it took me about 12 years to put into play what Grandpa was saying. And everything really needed to come to a crash, where I thought quantity of time was what was important in a marriage. My wife wanted quality of time. So we, without going into a whole lot of detail, we were in tough shape on our 10th wedding anniversary. And I had been traveling all over the place. I had a not-for-profit ministry that was out giving concerts. I was active in my church. I was working with Larry Burkett with Christian Financial Concepts, area coordinator for that ministry. I mean, I was going. Many times I was sick on Monday just to recover from intense Sundays. And it came to a screeching halt to me that, wow, this isn't working. And at the same time, on the work side, I thought I was really excelling. We were turning around these communities, and it was amazing. Every trip out, we was finding thousands of dollars in savings. But we went through this testing of the leadership of the key leaders. And the individual, he and his wife, who were instrumental, he's my 96-year-old mentor. He's still around.
Oh, wow.
I'm grateful for him. But I had met him a few years earlier, but we went through his testing process, and he and his wife sat down with me and just said, you're a middle management type. If you want to grow into a high-level leader, here are the things that you'll need to do.
Yeah.
And so I had a double hit. I had personally and professionally leveled.
Wow.
And, all of a sudden, I didn't know if I'd have an ongoing relationship with my wife. And I didn't know. I thought I was doing great, and I wasn't operating at a level anywhere close to a high-level leader, which is where I wanted to go.
Wow.
So it was a knockdown.
Well, that news, that kind of information, it can come to a screeching halt for a lot of times for one reason, and that word is identity, right? In our who we are and our definition of how we define if we're worthy, why we're worthy, what makes us successful, right? Comes down to how we associate our own identity with the type of person we want to portray to the world, right? The accomplishments we have. And, I think anyone, first of all, almost losing your wife and being told you're not a leader, that is a very big, beyond just the core of identity thing. It's like, boy, there are things that I think I'm doing that I'm not meeting the mark, right? So being told that you're not quite meeting the mark, it hurts. Straight feedback hurts, right? But when our identity is wrapped in, I'm curious about that to the core, because I'm thinking that there's a season in life closer to now, and as we all mature, if you would have been able to take that feedback differently, or how did it impact you then, and how do you think, over the years, maybe you would have taken that as you've grown in your faith differently if that had happened, later in life?
Yeah, I think the long and short, by the way, at the same time all that was happening, my dad was going through a church split.
Oh, no.
At his church.
Was he just an elder board?
He was a pastor.
He was, like so senior one of?
He was the only pastor, but he and my mom were just falling apart.
Oh, wow.
And
so on all ends, you felt it.
I felt it wherever I was. And,
oh, wow.
And so to me, it was just getting up each day and almost in a daze. And God would give me what I needed for each day.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to redefine what's important in life. And I moved away from this need to accomplish. My identity is in, and I don't want to say the things that we did weren't good things.
No, right.
They were wonderful things,
Right.
and wonderful blessings, a lot of great ministry. But it's a matter of balance, and it's a matter of margin, and it's a matter of what really a relationship with Christ looks like. And a relationship with Christ is not based on doing, it's based on being. And that is so incredibly important for people to know. So as I retuned, even as a seasoned believer, as I retuned and said, Lord, obviously it's got to begin with you. So he began to show me the steps to take to restore that first love of my wife, to restore that, what would be necessary to do that. And also, what changes did I need to make as a leader so that I would become the kind of leader God wanted me to be?
Dang.
And it's crazy. Usually leaders, when they have something go wrong or they have a project they're working on, I would work a lot with turnaround people, and the deadlines are huge. If you get behind, you put more time into it. You have deadlines, you put more time into it, you sacrifice. Quote unquote, you sacrifice. That's baloney, candidly. But you sacrifice because it's just a season, and then we get through this, then we'll have this, It's not the way it's supposed to be. And as I went to the office, I remember going to the office, I was traveling over 100 nights a year, and I sat down with my wife, and after I had resigned from some ministry positions, including a ministry I had founded, that was near and deep, it was near to my heart, but I couldn't continue that. And she never asked me to do any of that. I just said, here's what I have to do. And so the long and short for me was to go in the office and say, I can only travel 60 days this year. And if that's not okay, it's not going to work.
Wow.
And that was in agreement with my wife. 60 days sounds a lot better than over 100.
Wow.
And so we made those kind of changes, and I cut my hours back. And I thought in all candor, I thought my career was over.
Dang. How much real quick, the third element of that was your parents and the church split. How much of that were you burdening, the stress of what they were going through? Did you feel like you were roped into that too?
It was only an hour away, the church. And I had been instrumental in talking with the people that recruited my dad.
Okay.
I knew the church well. I actually had preached at one time at the church and brought the music group down to sing in there, and knew the leadership, but I could not get involved to help.
Yeah.
That was the biggest burden for me. Was I had no margin to help my parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other than to pray for them.
Yeah.
And even if I jumped in, I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah.
But I'd always collaborated with my parents in ministry, but
okay.
It was a very heavy burden to see what they were going through and not be able to help.
I'm sure it created some perspective too, in a way, and reminded you in some ways that you had some things in the home front to take care of, right? And to be able to really focus on that. But what you said caught my attention, and I went and pulled some lyrics from one of my favorite artists and songs. Is you're talking about, in the midst of all that, you'd wake up and, maybe with little energy, and you're looking to the Lord for, what to do that day, right? And I'm reminded of the song by Braden Lake, there's honey in the rock, water in the stone, manna on the ground, no matter where I go. I don't need to worry now that I know, because everything I need you've got. There's honey in the rock. So Jesus, the rock, in our daily bread, just right there, right? Like it. I hear this song, I still just am wrecked, and there's so much to it. But I feel like, you will always satisfy. Everything you need, I've got. Like, we often forget that fundamental principle, that we get up and we have no problem eating 3 meals a day, but a large portion of the world, and this is some data that I was privy to from Grace Church study that they did, that almost 9 out of 10 men will have a child that walks away from the faith. So if we're standing 10 guys in a room, 9 of them are going to have one of their children that just say see ya based on what they were taught or believe in faith. And then the second layer to that is 8 out of 10 men are biblically unfed. And so this idea of Jesus, you're all that I need, and there's honey in the rock, is like in the desert, wandering in the wilderness, lost. Like he provided and will provide. And you being able to get to that breaking point was not only ridiculously hard, but it was the reality that actually reset your course to then re-anchor the foundation to build. We talked about deconstruction to reconstruct a little bit earlier. Mm-hmm. What did that do when you rebuilt? How did you firm the foundation on the rock now? What best practices did you put in play when you realized that you were down, stripped away to its bare bones as you and God and Jesus is Lord?
Well, I think, first of all, you look to the Lord, your relationship with the Lord deepens dramatically.
Oh, yeah.
But I will tell you that as I began to put into place certain things, like my wife and I, we coined a phrase called whatever days. Mm. We just do stuff together, no plan, just whatever. When I would be away for board meetings on the weekend, have to travel over a weekend, I would take Mondays off for whatever day. Mm-hmm. When I was home, I was always available later at night for my daughter as much as possible, because that's when she liked to talk. Mm. And I involved my wife in the decisions I was making, every one of them. Mm-hmm. So no decision moved forward without her being part of it. She and I were a team, incredibly tight team. The first few years of our marriage, we had a very great start. Mm-hmm. But I can't imagine the kind of team, if I would have known what I knew at the start of our marriage, like 11, 12 years later, it would have been even more dramatic in terms of the team that we were, and we would never hit that speed bump.
Yeah. What did you have to find how were you able to rediscover your love for your wife to get to that place? Because I think it's a fascinating, I'm 16 years married and I'm still finding breakthroughs, right?
Right.
What worked for you to get to that place of intimacy?
Well, I think the first thing is the first time I saw my wife, first time ever I saw her, she was the one for me.
You knew.
I never, ever let that go.
Yeah.
I mean, even in the toughest of times, we were best of friends. Mm. So it was a matter of correcting course and learning how to live like God would want us to live. But that was the huge part of for me. For me, it was I never lost my first love for her, ever. It was always there. I went through a season, I call it a year without love, because it took about a year to get things back and humming.
Yeah.
Where you're just sort of working through the motions for a while. Revelation says for the churches that have lost their first love to do the things that you did at first.
Oh, that makes sense.
So you just practice the things that you did at first, which, think back to when you were first married, for example, the things that you did.
Yeah.
And you go back to those things. But for me, it turned out to be a terrific blessing despite the pain.
Yeah.
And God blessed us with a son about 3 years after that. And I cringe to this day. If we would have gone different directions, there would be no son. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So these are life-changing decisions. My decision to say, I want to keep going.
Yeah.
And the same way at work, it was basically saying, what do I need to do different? And I took the counsel I got seriously. Most people, when they get counsel, they don't take it seriously. They want to ignore it. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was, no, what do I have to do? I put barriers around my time, and I also began to pour more and more into others to get the work done. Mm. So I developed a high level of trust, even higher for my team. I moved on people that I couldn't trust.
Yep.
Or made recommendations for leaders that, hey, this isn't working.
Yeah.
We're probably too long suffering with some folks, but the fact is, if it wasn't working, it's not working.
Yeah.
And it was amazing to me what happened. I figured when I made those changes in my career, it was over. And it was just the beginning. Once those changes were made, we became the second largest system in the country in those 25 years. I served on almost every major board and initiative nationally that you could serve on, all with my wife, totally in sync, all with the opportunities to partner and to work on incredible initiatives, whether it was therapy companies around the country or accreditation around the country or investment managers around the country and tracking data, whether it's offshore insurance companies based in the Caymans or Barbados. I mean, worked on amazing initiatives, but I had that margin, and I always worked hard to preserve it. I've been known by some folks who know me well as knowing where jacuzzis are in every location we traveled. And I would always find the jacuzzi. There was one in Santa Barbara in particular that my boss and I at that time, before he actually passed away from cancer, and I took over his role prior to that. But he and I were trying to figure out a cash management system, and he had flown into Santa Barbara for meetings with me on the campus. He looked at me and he said, "We don't have any meetings this afternoon. What do you think we just stay at the pool and talk this through?" And I said, "That's the greatest idea I've ever heard." So we spent the afternoon in the pool and the jacuzzi, and we mapped out the whole cash management system that afternoon for the entire country. We had not been able to get clarity on that at all. But in the jacuzzi in Santa Barbara,
away from the grind, right?
We figured it out.
That's incredible.
But that happened all the time.
Yeah.
It was just, and it still happens. I spend a lot of time, what I call think time. I coined a phrase called think time, which is just literally shutdown time, where your mind isn't racing on things. I spend a lot of time at the YMCA. And during those workout times, I'll often go in with something on my mind. It's almost like my devotional time. And by the time I leave, it's resolved.
You're working through it with
I'm
the
working
Lord?
through it.
Kinda,
Yeah. And it's done. When I leave, I've got direction.
So I love this. I'd like to kind of jam on this for a minute, because the other phrase, and you're gonna have to share this phrase. It's part of your book that really guides this principle, right? In the business, we have this thing, and our personal lives often get neglected with this other thing. And I'll let you share with it. But the idea of think time, the ability to sort of get in your head and actually work through a problem, right? Because I think if you just go from one meeting to the next, one activity to the next, and never decompress, besides being able to just think and process, what other things did you do in this journey towards margin to sort of expedite any process for think time? Did you notebook? Did you have certain ways that you would start your conversation to sort of get to the end goal?
I think the input of others is always key.
Okay.
To sit down and see what their wisdom is on something if you've got an issue.
Yeah.
But also to just have that dynamic of, Lord, show me. I coined a phrase years ago. Some of it goes back to my grandpa Olson, the way he would look at business. But I would say, Lord, help. Lord, make it clear. And then, Lord, thanks. And I've used that prayer probably hundreds of times.
I like that.
And even this week, every week I go into my schedule. And it's been this way for a long, long time, where I expect something to be different. And God will bring along a resource or some individual or some team. We designed the first major computer system for the entire country in cooperation with two other communities and a developer. It became the #1 software system in the country, and I was in charge of that. Those who know me well know that I'm not a technician. I'm just not. But God brought some incredible resources, some wonderful people who I worked with, and we worked as a team. And throughout the country, he kept bringing people at the right time, the right place.
Wow.
We were doing over $100 million in development each year in terms of projects around the country. And various people would come to me and say, well, we need an elaborate plan to do this, on and on and on. Well, yeah, we did our feasibility studies. They're board approved. I get that, but I don't need to go much further than that. But the question was, what do you finance? What do you self-fund, all that kind of thing? I would look at it and I just say, Lord, just make it clear.
Lord help, Lord make it clear.
And by the time we decided to go to financing, it was always clear to me what we were supposed to finance and what we were supposed to self-fund. And I never put we put a lot of time and effort into it, don't get me wrong, but I never went to so crazy with it that it just took up all of our time, because development was only one part of what we were doing. So it was always, to me, Lord, just show me what we're supposed to finance. And he would do that. He would make it clear. And so it was those kinds of things that would happen that you could only attribute to the Lord. I've never ever attributed, things that have gone right for me that have been quote unquote successes to me. They're the Lord. And by the way, the other thing he does is that he also takes you through the valley. So it's not all success out there.
The mountains and the valleys. All right, so let's drill into the margin point here. So your books and the vision for this, this lifelong legacy, sort of capturing some of these thoughts and stories, and this principal idea of no margin, no mission, right? Communicating with God, and what's the other part of it?
Communicating with God.
Yep.
And connecting with
communicating God. And connecting with God. No margin, no mission, right? So the think time, I'm sure it kind of it's talked about in some ways there, but being able to bounce ideas off of other individuals, right? But then being able to walk through these particular areas of struggle or challenge. No margin, no mission. What has that meant to you, and why is it so important? And we shared episode 0 of my podcast, sort of sets this standard too, that I thought margin was always financial, and I didn't think too much about time, because I could just optimize my time to make more money. But I had to learn a few things the hard way. But why don't you share with us? I want to unpack that quite a bit, because I think that's healthy.
Well, no margin, no mission is really based on taking time to pour into others and to talk to others. I'm working with a church right now in Anoka where many of the people involved, it's a startup church, are from Teen Challenge or Minnesota Adult Challenge or from Salvation Army. These folks need somebody to listen. You can't sit down with them and just in 2 seconds, have a conversation. You've got to listen. You got to get their names, and you got to treat them with incredible respect and honor. You can't do that unless you have margin. It's incredibly important. And frankly, margin also results in you wanting to learn from them.
Right.
It's not a one-way street.
Right.
But for me, it's always been, how can I pour into others? This idea of for me, I saw it being not only transformative in my personal life, but transformative every part of my life, where I saw things happen professionally. And there's been some speed bumps along the way, but I've seen things happen that I can't attribute to God, anything other than God. Systems and processes we've put in place for a ministry called For His Glory, which ministers in Africa. Last month, there were 250,000 people coming to know Christ.
Oh, wow.
In 11 African cities.
Unreal.
But we have the analytics in place. We have the financial reporting in place. Now we're looking at a full-blown financial mission management reporting system that's respectful to our friends in Africa. But I think to myself, if they didn't have those tools, would 250,000 people come to know Christ last month? I don't know. It's a wonderful ministry, but to me, to enable margin, some room where leaders don't have to sit in board meetings saying, page 28 of the finances, turn to that page, and everybody thumbs through and nobody has a clue what's going on. You make it simple. Easy to follow. And then when you have your financial margin and your personal margin in line, your personal professional margin, you can serve others. Having
that capacity, that headspace, right? Because if you're just kind of going, you kind of end up serving yourself, right? But able to be available. I think you mentioned it too, for your wife, for your daughter, for others. That margin I found is like, whoa. what you can do with this space,
Yeah.
It's powerful.
And I mean, for me, the first major, I had, my dad being a pastor, we had a lot of leaders in our house for meals. Frankly, they were wonderful people, but most of the conversations are pretty boring for a kid.
Yeah.
And I got a little tired of come over to Macedonia and help us in the missionary presentations, and the sunsets and the sunrises and all that kind of thing.
Right.
And frankly, they didn't have a whole lot. Many of them just wanted to talk about their ministry.
Yeah.
It's my ministry, and here's what's happening. I'm not being critical. It's just so many of us get these talking points where we just wag jaw forever about ourselves.
Right.
And the more you can pour into others, that's the objective. And I remember Dad was pastor of First Baptist Church, Cokato, Minnesota, and I'm an asthmatic, and I was homesick on a Sunday with asthma. That was quite common in grade school, and I still have it. But the long and short was the head of the Minnesota Baptist Conference was coming to our church that day to preach. And this head honcho, I was sitting at home, and I figured I will never meet him. I will never know who J.G. Johnson is. Why would he have any interest in a 8-year-old kid with asthma? And then my mother came home after church. It still chokes me up. She came home after church. They were doing a potluck, but she came home a little early. Minnesotans always have to do potlucks. But she came home a little early, and she said, "Ricky," my grade school name, "I'm bringing with me someone I'd like that wants to meet you. This is J.G. Johnson." I'm in my pajamas and wheezing and all of this, and J.G. Johnson looks at me and he says, "Ricky, I heard you love checkers. Can we play some checkers?"
Nice.
I'm playing checkers with J.G. Johnson, the head honcho of the Minnesota Baptist Conference, and just falling in love with the guy. And to this day, I can't tell you who won the checker game.
Really? Doesn't even matter.
I don't care. But the fact that he would take time for me, a sick kid.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember that.
Yeah.
It was about an hour commitment.
Yeah.
Now, he became like one of my heroes in life.
Think about that. The magnitude and the trajectory of that mindset of someone being willing to be selfless and pour into you, right? And just to come see you on an off day. Unreal. Like, I think that speaks volumes to some of maybe your, the dynamic in you, being able to see that and then having, a church home, your parents and then a grandfather. How much did you feel the pressure of church and organized religion in an unhealthy way, but then also the good side of loving Jesus? Because I want to unpack, you had a grandfather, and we talked about the CBMC ministry that you and I met through,
Right.
Christian Businessmen's Connection. It's grown worldwide in over 60 countries, I think I heard Don say. But goes back to the early 1900s, and your grandfather was involved. But so it sounds like there's a long line of ministry in your upbringing. Did you have multiple facets of how you viewed the church? In some cases, both obviously good and bad. The good certainly, we can see through the life you lead. But some of the challenges of being a PK and then a grandfather who has started a pretty big thing. At the time, you didn't know. But how is that? How is the inside scoop of ministry with your grandfather and your parents in that role helped shape you as much as JG maybe?
Well, I think, my folks experienced the good and the bad. My mother was hurt badly in the ministry.
Really?
And something that she lived with all throughout their days in the pastorate. Cruel, just trying to be too busy, trying to do too many things, trying to pay the bills. Most pastors in those days didn't have livable salaries. And so... But when we moved to Cokato, Minnesota, I was really happy there. And then Dad had this goofy thing called the Will of God, where he thought we should go to Nebraska. And I spent my junior high days in Nebraska, and it was horrible. My asthma got worse, and I got sick my freshman year, in addition to the asthma, with infectious mononucleosis and missed
Ooh.
70 days of school.
70.
When I came back, there was only 100 kids in our high school, freshmen to seniors, and when I came back, the kids called me Sick Rick.
Oh, goodness.
And they would line up and just watch the way that I walked, and they thought I walked like a duck. So they would quack when I would walk down the hall. I would come home just crying. Just saying, and my Dad was wonderful. He'd play ping pong with me and do everything he could, and then go back to school and try to do it again. And then a letter came from Bellingham, Washington, and Dad said, "Oh, we can't move to Washington. That's too far away." And I said, "Dad, could you at least pray about it?" And after a couple of days, he prayed, and he said, we need a candidate. So we went to Washington and ended up going there to start my sophomore year of high school. And the 7 years I was based in the Northwest were the times I fell in love with Jesus. Prior to that, I had met Christ when I was 7.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw so many things that were beautiful, but also things that were very detrimental, particularly to my mom and to me. And by the time I was a sophomore in high school, I didn't really want anything to do with. I was coming to the point where I just said, I'll fake it for a while, but I don't want anything to do with this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to a retreat of the Columbia Conference youth retreat that fall after we had moved, and Josh McDowell was the speaker. And Josh talked about the resurrection. And he talked about how Christ had changed his life. And when I heard the proofs of the resurrection, I said to myself, it doesn't make any difference what people think or do. We're all going to do things that are harmful to each other. We're going to do things that are helpful, but we're also going to hurt each other in some ways at some point. And so I never turned back from that time with Josh. I rededicated my life to Christ. I haven't looked back since my sophomore year of high school. That was it.
Dang.
The
saying, hurt people hurt people, and I think there is a lot of church hurt, and it's an encouragement, though, just hearing that story that, God had a bigger plan, and you got a hold of your life and were able to kind of bridge that through someone like a Josh McDowell. But there are so many instances where the human that knows Jesus is going to make the mistake that causes detrimental harm and hurt for lifetimes to come. I mean, for the lifetime of your life, to sit and process those hurts.
Right.
And to look away from Jesus, from a human, right? It wasn't Jesus that hurt you, but it's like, that is hard to bridge. How do you, and again, your environment and some of those things you just described, for you to get through that, what he said, do you recall what you said, the resurrection? So the proof, that was like enough for you, facts, and that you got there and you got your head around that. But for the others that have hurt from humans in the church, like your mom, right. Did you see her restore and ever get through things, or did she carry it her whole life?
It was her whole life.
And
it was very private. It was something that nobody knew. Other than my dad and mom and me. And even immediate family had very limited knowledge of it. But she lived with a number of phobias that she could not shake. And it all began with, when she was at Bethel, she was like the cheerleader, speaker.
Oh, wow.
Talent galore,
Yep.
And she still used a lot of those talents. I
Yeah.
mean, Mom and Dad were a terrific team. They
Yeah.
partnered together in ministry.
Yeah.
But there were just certain things that she lived with, and as a result, all of us lived with, because of, I still don't know what happened.
You never found out.
Well, Olson's, we tend not to, that generation is very, very
Sure.
private. And so you can never really ever talk it through.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, I had a general sense of what happened and knew enough. And, of course, experienced it as a young kid.
Yeah.
And then throughout my life.
Yeah. Wow.
And so you look at it, and you can either be, Dad used to have a sermon called Bitter or Better. And I've seen bitter people. I just ran into somebody just the other day who got upset about something with somebody at a church and said, "I'm leaving." And I wanted to weep. It's so immature, and God will probably bring that same situation around again,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll just keep resurfacing until we work through that.
And it's going to go. It's going to become worse for that person.
Yeah, and so work through it and see what happens. But I want to make it clear, the church overall, there were many, many blessings and many wonderful saints and many wonderful people that poured into me.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for the church overall.
Yeah.
But we're human, and we're very capable of doing damage to each other.
So your a couple of your favorite people I've heard, both your grandfathers. So maybe just a little bit on them and kind of the history there, because I feel like, you have a parents, and especially as a PK, you see your father a certain way, and you see your mother with what you're kind of describing. But then, those many people don't always have maybe godly grandfathers that can pour into them that way. But you had two, right?
Mm-hmm, right.
And both kind of led you in different ways with different personalities. Mm-hmm. What was so instrumental in kind of the legacy that they led for you that kind of inspired you to carry on that mission? You mentioned that earlier.
Well, they were both very, very passionate about the Lord, but they were as different as night and day. And Grandpa Olson was one of the 12 men of the upper room that founded CBMC in the Twin Cities in 1938. 12 men.
Yeah.
Billy Graham came to the first St. Paul meeting of CBMC in 1950, held at St. Paul Federal Savings and Loan, where Grandpa was president, executive director for over 40 years.
Wow.
So his mission was to pour into the lives of businesses, and he had this thing about not-for-profit organizations making loans to not-for-profits. I don't want to overstate this, but I don't know if Northwestern would be here if it wasn't for Grandpa.
The college?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's 7 years on the board, and the work that was done during those years. And he did that when he went on the board when he was 62.
Wow.
And so he went off the board, I think he was 83 or 85. Wow. Grandpa did not believe in retirement. He had to be wheeled out of the office at age 82. He passed away at age 95. But devotions every day, even cutting the lawn with a suit on, a sport coat on, or, regular dress pants, white shirt. I mean, very proper. He used to take me down and buy suits for me, make sure I had the right suit.
Oh, wow.
I worked for him for one summer and saw him in action, and everybody in St. Paul knew him. Grandma was very supportive of him. I think she was a little lonely now that I look back on it.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful. Everywhere I go, I see Grandpa's.
He's touching her hand on something.
Yeah. He had something going on with something, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah.
I'm proud to wear the name Olson.
Yeah.
But the name Anderson means even more to me at times. Grandpa Anderson couldn't wait to retire. He was an entrepreneur. He started Christian ministries. He was leader. Everything he touched, he was in leadership. This in the Chicago area. He formed a camp, was the founder of one of the camps that was called Camp Hickory up in just down the road from where my dad became pastor. He was one of the founders of that camp. That's typical Grandpa. He was passionate about bringing people home, and Grandma never knew when somebody was going to come home for a meal and entertainment. He just poured into everybody. Both Grandpas taught Sunday school, and they poured into their kids like crazy. They had that in common.
Yeah.
But Grandpa loved to fish, and he got a place up in Wisconsin. He was told if he didn't slow down, he would die. And so with his work demands in Chicago being what it was with traffic, he couldn't wait to retire. So at age 65, he went to a place called Lake Higanza in Stoughton, Wisconsin. And it was there that I had numerous pier talks with Grandpa. I loved it.
At the edge of the dock pier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Grandpa Olson had devotions in the morning, devotions at night. I mean, it was very, very thorough, regular routine. Grandpa Anderson, I can't ever remember having devotions with him.
Huh.
He never opened up a devotional and shared it with me. On the pier, we talked about Jesus.
Huh.
And we talked about all parts of what it meant to be a Christian.
Yeah.
And it was so personal sometimes.
Mm.
And there was no judgment on his part.
Mm.
You see, sometimes the Olsons, we had a little bit of checkbox Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm.
Christians don't dance, drink, or
They don't chew or go with
or
girls that do.
Go with girls that do, but it was
Yeah.
very, very judgmental.
Mm.
And some of our family, I believe some of my cousins, others, might have been driven away
I'm sure. Mm-hmm.
from a relationship with Christ because it was so judgmental.
Mm.
And it wasn't intentional. It was the culture of that
Yeah,
day. The
for
church
sure.
was very much driven on
Yeah,
appearance
do's and don'ts.
and how you looked.
Yeah.
All of that. When the hippie movement came along, it was hard for the church.
Yeah.
It was really good for the church, but it was very hard.
Yeah.
But Grandpa Anderson was, if he, with the Olsons, you didn't necessarily know where you stood and you couldn't necessarily talk things through. Grandpa Anderson was, if you disagreed on something, he'd tell you. Like, he didn't like a particular type of music, gospel music I was listening to. So he told me. I get to the lake to visit him and Grandma, and he lets me have it about this music. The next day, he had gone out and bought records of this particular group and brought them to give to me. I mean, it was just the extremes. Grandson, I don't like this, but I love you, so here's the records.
That's crazy.
That kind of stuff. So, but Alive and Living came from Grandpa Anderson.
That's awesome.
No margin, no mission. All that came from Grandpa. He would sit on the pier, sort of pound his chest a little bit, and he'd just say, it's great to be alive and living.
Oh, man.
But he would pour into people. I have all his sermons. He would preach sermons during his life as a Christian layman. I have all of those.
Oh, wow.
During his retirement, he worked on those. He always hoped that I would take those and use them. I haven't done that yet. I still hope to get them categorized before I'm gone. But
Wow.
Grandpa just poured into me.
Are those all in written form?
Yeah, the whole whole boxes.
Have you thought about how you'd do that?
No.
Because I think it'd be interesting just to sit down one day and start recording yourself out loud, reading them. Got a couple apps, and then
wow.
record that. It'll
Right.
transcribe it. You take that, turn that in, or even just take the audio file and upload it. I got a tool, and it'll
Right.
pop you out a written transcript.
Right. Well, that's
So,
cool.
or just pay someone to read it,
Right.
out loud.
But I think Grandpa, the thing about him, one of our last conversations, I remember it well. We were on the pier, and he said, "Grandson," I don't know what brought this on, but he was always believing that I was going to be somebody who would be doing a lot of speaking. So he had set up luggage and stacked it up in the house, put his sermon notes on top, and they were handwritten out. And he said, "Grandson, preach that now." So I had to read his sermon notes, and I pretend to be preaching. And he said, "A little more emphasis on that, a little less."
No way.
First time out on a Bethel gospel team, I used his sermon notes, and the guys were holding up cards in the front saying, "This is boring. Can you do something else?" Scale of 1 to 10, they were giving me a 5 or a 4.
Oh no, we need a little more emphasis here.
So I used them in a little different way going forward. But he was all of a sudden he looked at me and he said, "Grandson, you're going to be a speaker, and you're going to be talking to lots and lots of people. You're going to get the attraction of women." This is my grandpa.
It's your grandpa saying.
And he said, "They're going to tell you you're really good, and you're going to just fall into the trap of that adulation." He said, "Don't do it. It's not worth it."
How old were you when he said this to you?
I was like college.
Oh, okay.
But he was just adamant. He was just saying, "Grandson, watch it."
Was he right? Were you?
I never knew, because the fact is, with the counsel he gave and others, I've had wonderful female friends,
Sure.
professional friends all across the country.
Yeah.
I think the world of them.
You maybe subconsciously always had that.
I never ever
trepidation.
crossed any lines, or even if I knew the lines were there to cross, I wasn't even aware of it.
Right.
And so it just took it off the radar screen.
Wow.
It's just like my grandma Olson. She said, "I don't want you to get married until age 25." And for some silly reason, I agreed with her. Now, Grandma died before I was 25.
No way. Okay.
But I got married at age 25.
Oh, wow.
Right on the day. And I didn't want to get to heaven and have Grandma Olson say, "You made a promise."
Right?
I don't think heaven's that way, but
No.
But in our minds, but they poured into me. All four of them. My Grandma Anderson, when she first met Kay, my future wife, she pulled me aside, never given me an ounce of advice, ever.
Oh, wow.
She'd listen to me all the time, but never. One time she did. She said, "Grandson, don't blow it. This is it.
Don't lose her." That's good. Well, that's one you write down and you hold on to that one,
Yeah,
and you
that's
sure
right.
did. And you said when you met her, so you already knew Grandma was right.
Well, she was something. But I really want to encourage people, number one, if you are a believer and you've got that heritage, so many times people are sharing the stories of the addictions and being healed from. I've never had that. I'm grateful to God that I've not, had a drug thing. I've not smoked. I've not had a battle with alcohol and all these kinds of things. I'm not being proud about it. I'm just thankful that I had a family that said these are the things we do and these are the things we don't do. And I look at it now as being very much, hey, that was a blessing from God. And I think those who have that should share that more in a helpful way, because there's so many who are looking for what's this going to look like,
Right.
and what kind of legacy can I leave, and they can start a legacy for their families now.
Yeah.
That when their grandpas or grandmas and their kids, it's just like I got a beautiful text today. My grandson is at UMD. He texts me, he says, "Fall break, Papa Rick, I'd like to see you this Thursday. I'm going to be home." Well, you know perfectly well, whatever's on my calendar, we're going to work it out. That's,
Margin, baby.
That's called margin. And,
Yeah.
and so we're getting together this Thursday afternoon. But an opportunity to pour into my grandson? Are you nuts? I want that.
That's so good. Yeah.
And you know what? I learned from him.
Yeah.
I learn from him every time I'm with him or with my other grandsons or with my family. And people can start that, to know that somebody cares.
Yeah.
I always knew that the family loved me. Olsons tended to keep it to themselves. And you sort of knew. We told you once, so we'll never tell you again.
Yeah.
Andersons are, what's going on in your life? We
Right.
want to know.
They showed it.
Let's talk about it. If you got something going on we need to talk about, bring it up. Let's go. It was very different.
Wow.
But they all loved Jesus. They just
Right.
had their own individual way of
showing.
living it out.
Well, and that's the reminder for us all too. And as we wrap, just thinking about, our uniquely God-given abilities and talents and passions. And like you said, he knows us. And so the sphere of influence, often we underestimate, right where we are. And you nailed it perfectly. Your own grandfather, right? Like your own grandfather could have took for granted the fact that you were just one of his grandchildren and not gave you that attention, right? And could have been neglected the very thing that maybe transformed or changed the way you view this idea of margin, right?
Right.
And so I look at that and it's like, don't take that for granted. And back to the whole idea of stewardship, stewardpreneurship is like, now that you know that, you will be judged based on what you do with that.
Right.
And that judging isn't for man, but it's you've been armed and you've been equipped. And so when you go back out into the world and you choose to bury that talent or that gift and not use it, it is you stupid fool. You could have at least done something little with it, right?
Right.
And so it's a reminder of all of this and why I'm doing this, and just the fact that I know you. I needed to get you on the camera to just have this conversation, because so much wisdom there and learning, the stuff that would happen in a forum meeting, a CBMC group meeting, is one thing. But the other thing is when you take all of these life learnings and lessons, from one man, and then you multiply it on times 10, and you start thinking about the problems in your own life, the questions that grandparents ask that a lot of times parents or grandparents aren't even asking me or hadn't asked me for many, many years. There are other people in your life that need to be asking those questions, because we do have feelings and emotions, and we are beings that need human interaction. So,
Right.
I can't share enough about just the vulnerability and willingness for you to spend all this time with me today. But, and it shows because, I'm very grateful because how you and many other men have been able to pour into me. So, what a great time, spending with you.
I just want to mention one thing. I had mentioned that professionally I was sort of leveled way back in time too.
Yeah.
That same couple retested me a few years later. And then he tested me again for a major leadership role about a dozen years later.
That's right. Right.
And the thing that they said to me, and I've got to be careful how I say this, that I had become a level 1 leader, that only 5% of leaders get to that point. I was shocked. And I got to tell you, it's not about me. It's taking a kid from Nebraska who couldn't walk down a hallway without being fearful of the taunts of his classmates.
Yeah, amen.
A broken kid with asthma, can't even breathe. And taking a kid like me and putting me in a $500 million organization and initiatives around the country. And my wife passed last summer with cancer, but I loved her so much. I have that incredible relationship, which so many people don't have. To have kids and cousins and so many others, family members and friends and colleagues. I'm probably one of the richest guys in the world. And ahead of me is still things God has called me to do. But I got to tell you, I'm excited because finally ahead for me is a day when I get to go home. And when I go home, standing next to Jesus will be my wife. Years ago, I gave her a tour of campus at Wheaton.
Yeah, I love that.
And it was the first time we had gotten back together. We had dated for a little bit, and then all of a sudden we met again at Wheaton. Sort of an unusual experience. And I said, "Can I give you a tour?" I made things up about Wheaton. And then I took her home after that, drove her home, and it was history after that. But, heaven, when she looks at me and says, "You got to get a tour of this place. You can't believe what this is like." There'll be no embellishments in heaven like I had to do for Wheaton. That doesn't exist.
You'll just be proud to have her give you that tour.
I'm looking forward to it. But in the meantime, I get to be here, and I get to talk with you, Josh, and I want to commend you for what you're doing. I'm proud of you, and I'm grateful for you, and I'm grateful for all the guys at CBMC.
Yeah, man.
A choice group of guys.
Yeah, for sure.
They love Jesus, and I'm excited to see what God has in store for all of you, and glad to be on the playing field watching it.
Yeah, same, and participation award and all that stuff that comes with it. I think I shared with you before that the answer is if I'm not dead, God's not done, right? And so at 75 years young, we can aspire to continue to be used, and behind your heart is the interest in that. And I think God sees that and honors that, and he ain't done. So until that day, there's still more work to be done.
Yep. No margin, no mission. Let's go, leaders.
Amen.
Get it in order.
Such a great time, Rick. Appreciate you coming on, and thank you for joining another episode of Successfully Unsuccessful podcast. I'm your host. Until next time, we'll see you. Thanks.